Welcome to the Tech 1-2 podcast. I'm your host, John Campus, founder and CEO at EMPIST. Today in the studio, I have Ken Hughes joining me today, and we're going to discuss a very important topic about social engineering. So let's get started.
All stations, drop what you're doing and stop Spider-Man.
Wait, me?
Miles Morales, he's entering Sector 4.
Do I have web on my face? What's the deal?
Miles, he's right there, he's right. Turn around!
I don't see anything, boss.
This day get any damn weirder? I guess it can.
Well, Ken, great to have you in the studio today.
Thanks, John. It's great to be back here. Thank you for having me in the studio again. And happy birthday.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Very special day today.
Have the day with you. Thanks.
21 years old. Has never felt better.
I laughed so hard, my ribs hurt.
Well, fantastic. Well, once again, I mean, we're talking about a very important topic today, and that's about social engineering. Social engineering, when you incorporate social engineering into attacking a business, you can pretty much guarantee about 100% success rate when you incorporate some of the techniques and tactics of social engineering. So just to set the stage for the audience, social engineering, it's trying to manipulate users, malicious users trying to manipulate users to gather certain data that might be personal identifiable information about the company that they can then use to weaponize that information to attack a business. What have you seen as far as within the industry, as far as just social engineering?
It comes in many flavors. Probably the best known would be phishing, and these are emails that are meant to fool the user into taking some sort of action. So that's certainly one element to social engineering. There can be attempts to physically compromise a location. So with faulty badges and such would be another way to try to get onto the premises and take whatever the next step is so that they're closer to getting into the network.
So who are you working for?
So let's talk about the one that we hear about quite a bit, phishing. Phishing emails that are being sent that are social engineered in a way to collect that information and to use that to attack a business. What are some of the things that you've seen in industry from a phishing perspective as far as some examples of phishing emails and what type of information would they be looking to collect?
Sure. I'll start with the target. Commonly, it's a finance person who is of particular interest. I think they'll take access to anybody that they can trick into probably sharing their credentials, get into the network, move around, and find some things. But we've specifically seen that finance professionals' credentials are interesting because they can be used then for business email compromise and try to fool a creditor into making a payment. So they'll say, hey, our banking details have changed. I need you to send the money over to here.
Don't you trust me? No, I don't.
They can be spammy and non-specific, but the more specific that they are, the more likely they are to fool. And that a very specific and highly customized phishing attempt is called spear phishing.
All right, so that's a great segue. I mean, spear phishing. What are we talking about when we hear spear phishing? That's not at Lake Michigan.
It is. There's no muskies or I don't know, coho salmon. This is not about coho salmon in Lake Michigan. It is a very specific, crafted, took time, effort to persuade the recipient that it is genuinely from it. Nobody thinks that this is coming from a Nigerian prince. Often these requests will come in with a sense of urgency and unavailability of the sender, so that the person will take action. But they're highly believable because they've been researched. I'll leave it at that.
All right. So when we say research, we look at just social media platforms. And for someone to create a very unique, very specific email, like a spear phishing campaign, they have to collect this information through multiple sources. One of the most common ones that we'll see is just on social media. social media platforms and the type of information that users are sharing on their social media platforms when they don't have privacy settings, they have it publicly available, whether they're going on vacation or they're starting a new job or they achieved a new certification or they're welcoming someone to their family. All this information is made available on a social platform for their friends and family, but also the bad actors. So how is this information being scraped and, pulled together to target some of this spear phishing attacks?
Well, there's a monetary incentive to do it. It's simply worth the time and the effort of the bad guy to look and learn about the target. So simply time and effort. These tactics pay off, and so they go to it. But as you mentioned, it can simply be publicly facing on Facebook or LinkedIn. And you put enough pieces together, eventually you've got a picture.
I saw the signal. That's not you?
And a person who might be close to the spoofed individual will say this is believable because it is believable.
Yeah, it's factual information that's been made available and then just being weaponized using that information to create a story that is then targeting may just not be one individual, maybe multiple individuals that person has a connection to. So when this type of information is made available on social platforms, are there some best practices that individuals should follow as far as what they're sharing?
We need best practices in our security.
One thing you can do, although it flies in the face of common social media practice, but delay. If you'll be out of town, rather than taking pictures the moment you hit the ground or you say, hello, I'm at O'Hare Airport and off we go, see you in 13 days, you could post your life experiences after you've taken that. LinkedIn is probably mostly quite visible. I don't know if there's a bunch of great practices because it's meant to represent ourselves to the greater business world partner community. I guess the first thing that comes to thought is just delaying on that or be non-specific. You could always just not put it up.
We will, of course, delay the announcement out of respect for our former chairman until after the celebration of his birthday this weekend.
People want to share their experiences. They want to share their life stories. They put them on social media. That's, I guess, a risk that people are willing to take. They need to strike a balance on what information they're making publicly available and what they're keeping, more privately.
I say, even your conversation right there feels like enlightenment to me, right? We just need to tell people to be careful about this, right? It can have an adverse outcome. And I'll say, I didn't think about it. I mean, I know I talked about a delay, but to me, it was insightful. If there might just be some learning there for all of us as end users, be careful what you put up. Assume it will be seen by somebody who will use it against you.
Absolutely. So you mentioned learning. We've had a number of episodes regarding education and security awareness. How does someone know what they should post, what they shouldn't? What should they do when they receive that email that seems suspicious? What shouldn't they do?
Teach me.
Our starting point should be that the people don't know, and that if we wish to protect ourselves in the company, that we need to educate our users. So you can do that through specific web training platforms. You can do it through, this is something that should have the visible backing of leadership in the company. I think that will help to make the importance of our practices, the correct and permissible and expected practices, should have the visible participation and expectation of the leadership of the company.
Wow, that's an important factor there, leadership. Having ownership and the buy-in from leadership in order to create this security-first culture. Oftentimes, we look at organizations and people don't want to feel, let's say, dumb because they don't know. And they oftentimes will just do something that they've taken some action. They're not sure if it's safe or not, but they'll just try to sweep it under the rug. Hopefully nobody notices it because there isn't this risk-free culture, security-first culture, blame-free culture. So having executive leadership that has a buy-in on this, in training the staff, making sure that you're not only training once, you're training on a regular basis because things change. The attack vectors, the tools that these bad actors are using. One that comes to mind right now is we just look at the incorporation of AI, that it's making it a lot easier to create emails that are more difficult to spot.
Well, they decided to just let humans turn themselves into robots.
But what are some signs that our listeners can really look out for?
You know, we live in such a hurried world, and our life's pace can be that, and so we may not take the time to think. So the most important thing to do, and I'll answer your question directly, but the most important thing to do is just to slow down and think. And I know that fights against the way that we work. Listen to the way I speak. It's very fast.
Slow it down. Think it through. Then you will see the traps coming.
We can say, is this in character? Was this expected? Is this a well, I'll go with those. Those are some of the things that stand out. Certainly, if there's poor spelling, there's other things that you can do if we're talking about phishing emails that you can look at, and that can be pretty well trained.
Yeah, I mean those are obvious signs. You know, the urgency, the grammatical errors in the email. But now that you have platforms, AI platforms that are drafting these emails for you, they're becoming more difficult to spot. And you know, businesses just need to be prepared for being victimized by a bad actor through a social engineered campaign, which isn't just phishing. I mean, there's voice, you know, there's calls that happen, there's texting that occurs, there's voicemail dropping that happens, and they're using all the information in every touch point as part of a social engineering campaign. Let me collect this piece of information. How do I collect another piece of information for that company? How do I connect the two through a reconnaissance phase, pulling as much information as they can before they launch the attack? So businesses need to safeguard. We know training, but there's also technology that can be introduced to safeguard that. So in the event that an organization does fall victim to a social engineered attack, what is the exposure that organization will face by that user being compromised? So, you know, you meet with clients, you know, every day. You talk about areas of risk, and we try to associate risk based on critical, high, medium, and low, because decisions and action is usually taken based on the amount of risk that an organization is willing to tolerate. So when we look at the risk associated with not protecting a business, and we'll just, let's say, phishing through a social engineer campaign, what level of risk would you say that an organization faces by doing nothing?
I think it's extraordinary risk, and I think there's an increasing understanding that there is extraordinary risk. I had a quarterly meeting with a customer today who showed more awareness and, in fact, a sense of real urgency around putting multi-factor authentication in place, because she had learned, she'd finally now heard it enough times, that business email compromise can be very much limited by having multi-factor in. So I think that the risk is extraordinary, and I think that the awareness is increasing. It doesn't just happen. It's our duty as EMPIST advisors to continue to remind our customers that of the best practices.
In that and all things will we show our duty.
Having the right safeguards and controls in place to mitigate what the impact could be, is extremely important. And also creating this culture within the business that these things will happen. You need to report them. It's okay to report them. You will not be blamed by doing something like by clicking on an email that you shouldn't have clicked. But also, what happens when you start incorporating phone into it? How does a business really protect themselves from, let's say they have a new hire. New hire starts, Jane Doe starts next Monday. And Jane is a new employee who posts on LinkedIn that they just got a new job at Acme Corporation. And a bad actor sees that, as they've been doing recon on this company, and targets Jane. And I could send an email, or what if I just pick up the phone and find it through the web and call that person directly? A new employee starts. How important is it as part of the onboarding process of a new staff member to create a security first, culture within the business?
You tell me.
I don't know, you tell me.
Do I mind what? Do I?
Silence!
It is that moment where the human interacts with the technology that is your point of exposure. And so we take care of the user through the training. We harden our assets through, patching and configuration management and all the controls that we put in place. But the cat and mouse game will not end. It will be a both and approach. It needs to consider the involvement of the person and their wise practices, their careful practices, and then likewise, EMPIST bringing forward best practices and leading technologies to stay ahead of the bad guys in their attempts.
Absolutely. So we talked about email. We've also talked about voice. We talked about text messaging. We said more spear phishing. We've a couple other ways that an attacker can compromise a user is through social media platforms, not just the collection of information, but we've seen some campaigns recently where bad actors are creating campaigns. They're creating paid ads within these platforms to collect information from the users that are using these platforms. For example, they might introduce a game. Well, what year were you born? I now have someone's birth date. Well, where did you grow up? And there's games around it where then they're collecting all this information to create that story, that picture that you mentioned, where they can now use that to social engineer. Also, we haven't really talked too much about this topic, but deepfakes. Deepfakes where using AI-generated voice that is impersonating someone else. That is just, this is something that all organizations are going to have challenges with trying to combat and mitigate these risks. But these things are just constantly evolving. And ultimately, it's about awareness. It's about education. It's about mitigating the risk. We'll never eliminate it entirely. So as we wrap up today, and just from a social engineering side of things, we know how important it is. The effectiveness rate when you incorporate social engineering into an overall attack, it's been proven that it becomes very successful when you also incorporate social engineering. So anything that you'd like to leave our viewers and listeners with today?
Well, follow up with what you say. The probability for success in social engineering is high. The bad guys know what works. They have the motivation to do it. They have the means to do it. So our defense is to get smart, employ best practices, and take care of the technology side too. So I'll go back to it's going to require both and to be successful in resisting social engineering attempts.
Well, fantastic, Ken. I really appreciate having you. It's always a pleasure having you in the studio today.
Yeah.
For all of our listeners, slow down, add technology and to mitigate the risk. Use common sense and understand that social engineering is a real issue that we need to combat.
This is our fight, whether we like it or not.
Well, really appreciate having you in the studio today, Ken. We talked about a very important topic about social engineering and what businesses need to do in order to mitigate and keep their businesses safe to a potential attack. When you incorporate social engineering into the overall attack spectrum, the success rate is significantly higher. So your teams need to know what they need to do and what they shouldn't be doing when they're being social engineered. So thank you for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you next time.